requesting for a 10 minutes of presentation from Mr. Vivek Khandelwal, Vice President of Business Development, Delta ID Inc. A round of applause for Mr. Vivek and a request to him to keep it for the 10 minutes. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to all of you. It has been a pleasure sitting through these presentations today. And if Rajesh is here, I want to point out to him that you envision this future of smile. We've already brought some elements of that to this reality today in the form of look. We can just look to make a payment. Yes. So you can just look to make a payment, make a transaction, and that future is already here. I actually recommend all of you to step outside during lunch and experience that future at the Samsung booth out there in the form of that Iris tablet. So with that, let me start this presentation. My focus is going to be really that look to pay. So I'm going to talk about something very different. It all enables everything that you've heard of in the form of payments, Aadhaar, Jan Dhan, all these very interesting initiatives that are in progress. But the basis of everything, it starts with us. God has given us, or whoever has given us these amazing eyes that make us very unique and different. And that is actually the basis of a lot of this movement that we are seeing in the market, enabling so many other things. So most of my focus is going to be on eyes, Iris, and how it is enabling all these initiatives that are going on. I'll take a moment to introduce my company, Delta ID. We are a company based out of USA. We've also started our presence, established our presence in India recently. So let me take a moment to introduce Delta ID, and then we'll talk about Iris and how it is a very interesting part of our biology that is enabling so much of what we heard today. Delta ID was founded with a singular vision of taking Iris, the part of our eyes that makes us so unique, and bringing that iris recognition capability into consumer mobile devices. So interesting story is the story about Delta ID is that we started with actually the Aadhaar program. Two founders of Delta ID were actually volunteers for the Aadhaar program. The initial team that was formed by Nandan Nilekani to start the Aadhaar program in India. These two gentlemen came from US, they volunteered, and actually it was during the Aadhaar proof of concepts and pilots that for the first time in the history of human beings, iris, fingerprints and other kinds of biometrics were studied in detail. And that's where the insights to form Delta ID came about, where we found that iris is actually a more stable biometric when you are using across such a huge population. And that led to the founding of Delta ID in US. The founders went back to US and started working on taking iris into consumer mobile devices. Since then, we have been out in the market. We have launched 5 devices in the world by now, which have iris recognition in some form or the other, one of them being showcased outside. We've also put together a very strong intellectual property in place around integrating iris recognition capabilities in mobile devices. So with that, let me switch to our eyes, our iris, which is enabling so much of what we heard today. Iris, I think most of you probably know, is this ring around our pupil. And it is actually a muscle that controls the size of the pupil and controls how much light enters into our eyes. So when we are in a bright place like this, the pupil will become small and allow only little light to go in. When we are in dark, the pupil expands and allows more light to go in. Iris, being a muscle, has a very rich pattern, which is very different. And that pattern is what is different. Even your two eyes are very different. And they are very different from eye to eye. So all these 14 billion eyes, or thereabout, are very, very different. And it is that muscle pattern. It is protected by the cornea, so your muscle, which is controlling the pupil, is actually behind a transparent layer. And it doesn't change with age. This iris gets formed during the gestation period, and it stays fairly the same all through the life, unlike many other features of our body. All these interesting aspects of the iris make it a much better biometric to use. The rich pattern that I talked about actually translates in the world of computer science to high information content. So there's a whole lot of information that we can extract from that pattern, that muscle that is around the pupil. That translates into something that makes iris more safe and secure to use. And in the world of biometric, we call that it has better false acceptance rate. False acceptance means when I am trying to access something, it will not allow somebody else to access. So, if I'm using my Aadhaar iris to make a transaction, the likelihood that somebody else can scan his or her eyes and make that transaction is very, very low. So it's that muscular pattern that makes that possible. Iris, as I mentioned, is protected by the cornea. So there's this transparent layer, it's an internal organ. So unlike fingerprints, where you touch things, you wash your hands, your fingers have all kinds of issues, wherein at times your fingerprint scan doesn't work. I recently saw a program in NDTV that talked about how fingerprints are not working in Rajasthan, where people are from rural background are trying to use Aadhaar for making payments or extracting money and so on. Those kind of issues don't exist. And all that is happening in those situations is what we call in the world of biometrics false rejects. Those people, they scanned their fingerprints during enrollment, and now they cannot use the same fingerprints to authenticate themselves. And all that is happening is because fingerprints get exposed to so much external conditions that make them affected by all these things that people touch. Similarly, as I talked about, when we say that iris doesn't change over the age, that basically translates into it being used across wider demographics. Fingerprints are known to not work for elderly people. It's because our skin becomes brittle over our age. Over 60, over 70, you will find people are having issues with fingerprint recognition because the touch surface, the touch is not as good on a surface which scans your finger. So these kind of advantages make fingerprint a much better biometric to use. I won't go into the details of this plot out here, but essentially this is a report from an independent body called Center for Global Development, which did an extensive analysis on fingerprints, iris, how good they work. One very simple way to look at this is on the x-axis they're talking about how secure is iris, how many errors are there where it is allowing somebody else to fake and become you, basically false acceptance errors. Those are on x-axis. On the y-axis here is usability or false reject, where how many times it is not letting you in when you are the right person. And the ideal situation is that you don't have any kind of errors. What you see on the plot here is there are the black lines over there are fingerprint, and how fingerprints, what kind of errors are there in fingerprint, both false accept and false reject errors. And in the green and blue lines, you will see the same results for iris. And what essentially this is saying is that iris has lower false accept and false reject errors. And also the other interesting thing here is that if you look at the slope of those black lines, there are steep lines over there. And what that is telling us is that as you try to make fingerprint more secure, reduce the amount of errors, which are called false accept errors, make it more secure, the false reject errors go up, which basically says that the same person will be rejected by the system. So these are some of the advantages of iris over other alternatives. And these were actually the very reasons why Aadhaar, when it started, it initially had just fingerprint as a biometric modality. And down the line, they recognized during the pilots and proof of concepts that iris is required so that we can make this a more accurate and foolproof system for a huge population like India. So these are some of the insights that led to the creation of Delta ID, and we created a software technology that we call Active Iris. And I'll just share a few insights into what Active Iris is and does. Active Iris technology has always been focused on implementing iris recognition on the mobile platform. We do both local authentication and remote authentication. So local authentication is user authentication, where a user can unlock the device by just looking at his or her device. Remote authentication is what happens during Aadhaar, where your eyes are scanned by your mobile device, as you might experience outside in the Samsung booth, and then that information is sent to a backend where authentication happens. We also provide at Delta ID the capabilities such as the ones that are running on the Aadhaar backend, where the server is doing the matching. So these are some of the technology components that we have brought to the market to enable iris on a mobile platform. It's actually fairly simple how the mobile platform is enabled to do iris recognition. You can see some of these elements outside in the Samsung booth, and probably with some of the Delta ID folks here in this event. There are three components to this system. There is an infrared light, there is an iris camera, and our software. The infrared light is very interesting. Most of us have eyes that are black in color, and so for a camera to see the pattern of your muscle inside the muscle pattern that the iris is, you need a light that can illuminate this muscle pattern, and that is the infrared light. Then you need a camera that can capture that particular illuminated eye, and that is what an iris camera is. And then you need some software that can process that image and either capture the eyes and send it to an Aadhaar backend or do a local authentication. This Active Iris system, as you might be able to experience outside, is fast and easy to use. It is the fastest in the industry. We have focused on usability in a very significant way, so you can use it from 20 to 40 centimeters. You don't have to make any extraordinary gestures like expanding your eyes or being very still or anything that makes it unfriendly and unusable. It has very low false acceptance of 1 in 1 million or better. And of course, being an iris system, it works for everyone across all age groups. It has been a pleasure and a privilege for us at Delta ID to work with Samsung in bringing this system to the market. It is India's first integrated mobile device, first Aadhaar-enabled device. It is actually the world's first tablet that has iris technology. And we believe this is a turning point in the rollout of Aadhaar and its wide-scale adoption in India for all initiatives such as Digital India, Jan Dhan Aadhaar, and other programs. This provides a very solid foundation to realize this dream. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I'll request you to be on stage, please. It was Mr. Vivek Khandelwal who gave a very interesting insight of how biometric can be used more efficiently. Thank you so much, sir. I request Mr. Fahimul Haq, the product head of Elets Technomedia, to present a memento to Mr. Vivek Khandelwal. A round of applause for his interesting presentation. Thank you very much, sir.